Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Star Trek: The Motion Picture. The team of the USS Enterprise getting back together after a long break from their canceled and legendary television series was successful in syndication. Paramount decided to mount a big budget movie version. It took them a long time to do it. In the 70s, they started and then they stopped, and then Sci-Fi became big and they're like, oh, now we'll do a Star Trek movie. So they decided to make Star Trek: The Motion Picture. The crew of the USS Enterprise are back together again to stop this big, weird space cloud from destroying Earth, where it is headed after it has destroyed these 3 Klingon vessels at the beginning of the film. That's I guess the brief plot of it. It gets more and more complicated. I think this movie's legendary for being fucking boring. It is. It's really dull. And I think part of the problem with this film is when it was made, and it's made at the beginning of what we look at sci-fi filmmaking as it is now. Obviously, there were sci-fi films since the beginning of film with the trip to the moon, and you look at Metropolis and the silent era, things like that, but there really wasn't a genre for sci-fi the way there is now. There's very much a genre of science fiction, and there are lots of big budget sci-fi films. In the late 70s, that really wasn't the case. Star Wars came along and really just reinvented everything in terms of science fiction. And before that, the only films people have seen that were science fiction is 2001 and maybe some B movies. So when Star Wars happened and every studio wanted a big budget sci-fi movie, or kind of weird marriages of epic kind of David Lean filmmaking with Star Wars stuff and 2001, they didn't really know what they were doing. They didn't really understand sci-fi, and you can tell throughout those films. There's definitely good films that came out in the late 70s that were made because of Star Wars, particularly Alien. But then you have your Black Hole and your Saturn VII. Neither of those I ever want to see again. And Star Trek: The Motion Picture is kind of in that vein. I mean, they have an overture at the beginning. It's definitely kind of trying to be Star Trek's take on 2001 a little bit. There's not much action in it, and it's kind of just trying to be a brainy sci-fi movie. It's not just that it's too brainy, it's that there are too many shots of admiring the ship and the other various ships and the Klingon ships and so many ships. And that opening shot in Star Wars is awesome, and shots of 2001 doing that are incredible. But this movie pushes it so far that I think if you cut it out, you might save 30 minutes of runtime. If you are someone who loves that shot in Star Wars and what if this was a whole movie? Well, Star Trek: The Motion Picture is for you, my friend. And then you have all these shots of people looking at each other. There are too many shots of people looking at each other and reacting to things. It was ridiculous. Robert Weiss is a great director. He directed the original The Day the Earth Stood Still, The Sound of Music, West Side Story, The Haunting, and he admits that this is kind of a rough cut because they kind of rushed it out. He was carrying the print to the premiere because they were that to the wire on it. It does feel like a rough cut. It feels like it's way too long. There's apparently a director's cut. I didn't see that. I saw the original cut. This film kind of killed Star Trek for a lot of people because it had the best attendance of any Star Trek movie until the newest reboot, and a lot of people stayed away from the movies because they're like, this is too nerdy and this is too boring. And that's why they had to completely redo it and do more of a fun movie with Khan. Star Trek had a lot of brainy sci-fi in it, but it also was fun. You watch those classic episodes and they definitely do talk about complex issues and it's very intellectual at times, but then you also have fun in it. This is the series that brought us The Trouble with Tribbles. With Star Trek: The Motion Picture, it looks like it's thumbing its nose at that. It's trying to be very big and epic. It is trying to be very brainy and thought-provoking, but the way they directed it makes it so stale and boring and long. I don't really like this movie. I like some ideas in it. There's parts of it I like. There's certain sequences that are cool. There's that haunting sequence where the transporter room messes up those 2 people, which seems a little ridiculous and probably could have been cut out, but it's in there and they meld those 2 people's molecules together and then they have to get Spock. Couldn't they have just gotten Spock? That was horrifying. That was absolutely horrifying. And then they're like, what we got left didn't live long. Oh, I don't want to think about what that was that came back. That's just horrifying. Studios were changing In the 70s, major movie studios were going through a lot of changes. You had older studio executives, and this is kind of their idea on how to make a big epic, and they knew Star Trek was a hot property. They wanted to have a big sci-fi movie. They were lucky that they already had a property that lots of people would see. Gene Roddenberry and everyone who wrote it and came up with the idea just overdid it, and in the worst way. The sets are amazing, and I really like looking at it for a bit, but it's just too much, and everyone in the Enterprise crew looks too old for some reason. In the later sequels, they don't feel as old as this one. And William Shatner looks like he's wearing a tennis uniform for most of the movie. Like, what is with those redesigns of the uniforms? He doesn't look cool anymore. He looks like your weird uncle. And then the Decker character, who was the dad on Seventh Heaven, I kind of like him, but he felt unnecessary. There are a lot of things wrong with this movie. And not only are there a lot of things wrong with it, it's also boring. If it was exciting and there are a lot of things wrong with it, you kind of could excuse it, but that it trudges along and then has some good pacing, but then that girl comes back from the machine thing and she's different and we have to waste time on that. The true story on why I'm reviewing this is really, I watched Wrath of Khan last night and I was like, maybe before I review that, I should watch Star Trek the Motion Picture so I get a better perspective on why Wrath of Khan was such a rejuvenation for the franchise. And boy, do I get it now. Whoa. Wrath of Khan is fun and is exciting and still is a pretty brainy sci-fi movie. And notice how rebirth is such a big thing in both this one and the next one. But in motion picture, it sounds like your boring science teacher. And in Wrath of Khan, it's fun and it is interesting. It does have amazing visuals in this. It is a very pretty movie. I like this way more than Black Hole and Saturn VII. I think it was too much of a leap. It wasn't very much like the show. There's just too many shots of looking at spaceships, people looking at the view screen, and not enough action. It's not an exciting blockbuster movie. It's definitely very different, and maybe you can give it kudos for being a very different kind of big budget studio movie. But it's not a good movie. It's not a fun movie. Everyone comes off as kind of cranky. I think this is one of the worst performances of Kirk I've seen Shatner ever do. Shatner and Spock felt really off to me. Everyone else seemed to do pretty well, but Shatner and Spock, especially Shatner, just didn't. This is like why people don't like William Shatner's performances like this, although I think he is actually a pretty decent actor. A lot of people criticize them for looking flabbier and older, and I don't think it's just because they are flabbier and older, it's just they're not as much fun in this movie. This movie isn't a fun Star Trek movie, and if you're someone who watches the syndicated series, sure, it took on bigger ideas, but it was fun. I hadn't seen it since I was a kid, because when I was a kid I thought it was boring as all crap. Maybe I have more patience now and I can sit through more boring craps, but I didn't think it was as boring as when I was a kid. I think the problem with this movie is it's ambitious, but it's not forward thinking enough at what its genre has really become. It's trying to put the genre in more of a 2001 place when people have moved on to Star Wars. So if you've seen Star Trek the Motion Picture and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. Tomorrow I'm going to do Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and then, you know, the new one as well. But I hope you're enjoying these Star Trek reviews. I forgot to mention that they were actually considering making a Star Trek Phase 2 TV series while they were making this movie, but they didn't, and it folded into the script. I'm curious what that show would have been like, but if it was anything like this movie, ick.